It's being hailed as the biggest trade deal in history. Donald Trump and Ursula von der Leyen have signed off an agreement that will see the European Union and the United States forge closer trading ties. But a headline tariff of 15% will be imposed on all European goods entering the US. That's more than triple the tax that's already in place. Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. A dark day for Europe. That's how the French Prime Minister, François Bayrou, has described the trade deal between the US and the European Union. It may have ended months of uncertainty, but many business leaders in Europe are far from happy. So, who are the winners and losers in this extraordinary agreement?
After grueling talks, the US president and EU leader announced a major trade deal, sat in the ballroom of Trump's golf course in Scotland.
So we have good news. We've reached a deal. It's a good deal for everybody, I believe. And I think you were saying this is probably the biggest deal ever reached in any capacity, trade or beyond trade. Thank you very much.
On the European side, officials greeted the deal with cautious optimism.
We have a trade deal between the two largest economies in the world. And it's a big deal, it's a huge deal. It will bring stability, it will bring predictability. That's very important for our businesses on both sides of the Atlantic.
Under the agreement, the EU will face a flat 15% tariff on nearly all goods entering the US. In return, Brussels has committed to purchasing $750 billion worth of American energy. The EU has pledged to invest $600 billion into the US economy by 2028. Beneath the smiles and handshakes, the deal hasn't been well received by some European leaders, including the French Prime Minister François Bayrou and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who said there was little reason to celebrate. Meanwhile, industry leaders in Europe warned the 15% tariffs are far higher than many had hoped. Key sectors like automotive, steel and pharmaceuticals face significant costs, and some may fear the deal sends a worrying signal about the future of global trade. The deal may mark the end of a tariff war, but has it just triggered a new economic rivalry?
Well, let's bring in our guests. I'm delighted to say, joining us from Washington, D.C., we have Allie Renison. She's Associate Director at Newgate UK and a former policy advisor to the Secretary of State for Business and Trade. In Minneapolis, in the United States, we have Amy Koch. She's a Republican strategist. And from Budapest in Hungary, we have András László. He's a member of the European Parliament from the Patriots for Europe group. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Ali, to you, first of all, I've seen a lot of criticism of this deal. People are saying that it seems a bad deal is better than no deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the people who were saying we needed to put up and shut up, effectively, that's because they wanted to avoid a huge trade war and retaliatory response from the EU. I think that Brussels has probably listened not only to the concerns of its exporters not wanting to be latched into a huge retaliatory trade war escalation, but also probably, I think, confronting some geopolitical realities. I think there was some concern that effectively a sort of a trade war wouldn't just be damaging economically, but could also choke off any continuing US support for the EU's geopolitical objectives, particularly around support for Ukraine.
Amy, to you, is this the beginning of a new world trade order then? Is that what we're seeing here?
Well, I don't know if it's a new world order, but it certainly has exposed some cracks in the EU. I think that there are competing priorities within the EU, that they were not prepared as a united front to negotiate with the Trump administration. I think, when you see the UK and the bargain that they struck versus what the EU managed to get out, I think that the EU is going to have to kind of go back to the drawing board and decide how, as a unified front, they are going to, as negotiations go forward. And there are many more left, right? We have the framework, we have many numbers, but we don't have everything complete here. The EU is going to have to figure that out, or they're going to continue, as you said, to have their lunch eaten by the Trump administration.
Andras, to you, just on that very point, we've seen some criticism from your Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, in Hungary, saying that Trump ate von der Leyen for breakfast. Is that right?
If we look at the state of the economy in the European Union, it's not great. And it hasn't been great for a couple of years now. We have very high energy prices compared to our global competitors, which is the United States and China. We have a bad competitiveness. This was already highlighted in a report last year. We've been struggling with this throughout the year, but the von der Leyen Commission is just not willing to take the hard but necessary steps to help European industry. And what we see now with this trade deal between the US and the EU is that the EU and von der Leyen went into these negotiations with their hands up and basically said, well, anything is good for us. Because what we got at the end was that the EU promised Donald Trump that we would be buying American weapons. It promised that we would be buying American energy, and agreed to an asymmetric tariff regime between the two blocs, which is more advantageous to the United States. And when the average citizen looks at the news and asks, okay, so what did we get? Well, there's not much.
Ali, to you, I see the IMF has upgraded its growth forecast now for the United Kingdom. So one unexpected winner, it would appear, out of all of this between the United States and the European Union is actually the UK.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate raging in the UK about whether, the way in which the UK has been treated differently than the EU is sort of a Brexit benefit. I think it is a benefit, but not it's a qualified one ultimately, because were the US and the EU to get locked into a trade war, there are definitely some second order effects that would affect our supply chains. I also think to some degree that the UK and the EU were always going to be treated differently and independently so by Donald Trump. But not just on sort of, spurious notions of, well, we like you better because you have a royal family, etc. I actually think that it's also helpful for the UK that, particularly in trade and goods, the UK doesn't have a trade surplus. It actually has a trade deficit with the United States, and the situation is reversed for the EU. So keep in mind that when Trump came out with his Liberation Day tariffs, the EU was supposed to get 20%. They seem to have settled on a 15% baseline. But as Amy says, there's a huge amount of negotiating left to do to sort of see where the exemptions are for certain sectors within that.
Thanks, Ali. Amy, to you, I guess one positive is that Europe and the United States have avoided a trade war.
Right. I mean, it's good for both sides, correct? Especially because Trump has a self-imposed deadline for Mexico, Canada of August 1st. So it's sort of like I have to get the EU settled and I have all these other folks that I need to get to. Because as right now, politically, he has a lot of support, right? Americans have sort of buckled in. He's established that we're going to take some hits, but it's all going to be for the better. I think the EU deal largely is looked at in the US as a success for the Trump administration, as I believe it should be. And that gives him some breathing room and gives him some leverage going into these trade discussions before his self-imposed deadline of August 1st with our very close and nearest trading partners of Canada and Mexico.
Andras, do you feel maybe Ursula von der Leyen rushed into this? The speed, the haste of all of this to get a deal?
The European Commission has the competency to negotiate trade deals on behalf of member states. So it's entirely the Commission's responsibility what comes out in terms of trade deals. What we see, which is very bad here, is that, as just said, the US, I think, is very fairly viewing this as a success. On European level, what we don't see is how we're going to get out of the economic stagnation Europe finds itself in. The von der Leyen Commission had basically no negotiating position because we are already very weak economically, and because we are on bad terms with China, we are on bad terms and not even in talking terms with Russia. So when the US goes into negotiations with the EU, it knows in advance that actually the EU has no other option and has no leverage in such negotiation, which leaves European citizens and European economy totally exposed. Already during the Biden administration, there was the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which included very big subsidies for new industries to move to the United States. Now with an asymmetric tariff regime, why wouldn't European manufacturers who also sell to the US market, why wouldn't they move their manufacturing to the US and ship back the goods to the European market? Because in that direction, the tariffs are lower. So this is totally untenable. I agree with the fact that a trade war is not the way to go. But unless the European Union is willing to take some tough decisions and get its own economy back on track, it's going to lose all of the trade deals, not only with the United States, but with all other trading partners, because we're simply not in a situation of strength, economically or politically.
Thank you. Ali, to you, talk to me about the impact on consumers. A lot of people will have seen this in the news and they'll be wondering, well, how's this going to impact on my life? Both sides of the Atlantic. Which consumer base do you think has got the better of this deal?
Well, actually, I mean, tariffs ultimately are going to impact, even if they're staggered, the importing markets, the US, most of all because those costs get passed down. Now, I think that a lot of supply chains and manufacturers have actually held off a lot of decisions because they wanted to see if we got to this trade war point. And I think similarly to the markets, everyone was most concerned about a huge fissure, a huge rupture. And that still may be possible between the US and its other trading partners if they don't get deals in place by the end of the week. But I don't think you're going to see a huge immediate sort of knock-on impact on consumers right away, mainly because a lot of businesses are still, while cognizant and happy that there isn't going to be a huge trade war right away that sort of escalates beyond and to where we saw the US and China get to, there aren't a huge amount of decisions being taken on reshoring or even moving things to the States or vice versa, because there's still so much yardage to go in terms of the negotiations on the detail that businesses aren't going to be doing much until they can actually see a final outcome.
Amy, talk to me about how this has been received then in the United States, because as it stands, American consumers are now going to be paying 15% more for any products coming from the European Union.
Right. And of course, that's seen as an issue, but we've already touched on the benefit, which is, are there going to be countries that are going to move their manufacturing to the United States as a result of these tariffs and and shift the trade and the manufacturing back here to the United States? Now that's a longer term play, but that has been the promise and sort of the argument of the Trump administration around their America First policy. They actually want to start and make more things here in the United States, and that's what he's been promising. If it has that effect over the next couple of years, along with some of these deals where they're buying significant more energy from the United States as part of this deal, $80 billion to another $750 billion in energy. Those kind of promises made and promises kept, will fare well for this administration, I think.
So, Andras, to you, it seems the Americans have got much the better of this, haven't they?
Very much so. I think President Trump is delivering an America First policy priority and agenda for the American people. Unfortunately, we don't see the European Union and von der Leyen delivering for Europeans. This has been a big problem. We could have changed leadership in the European Commission last summer. We didn't, because the European People's Party and the Socialists and Liberals decided to stay with her. We could have removed her this summer. They still refuse to do it. I think this trade deal is yet another reason why we should have change in Brussels as soon as possible.
So, Andras, come on then. Who would you like to see running the European Commission, if not Ursula von der Leyen?
At this point, any leader who's willing to take decisions and draft proposals based on common sense would be welcome. Because what we've seen from the von der Leyen Commission since 2019 is that a left-wing progressive ideology has taken over an approach which would prefer the interests of the European Union. We have overregulation, which is killing our farmers, killing our industry, and putting a lot of pressure on our households. We need a European leadership leading European institutions who are willing to look at the numbers, who are willing to recognize that many of the policies of the last couple of years have caused a lot of damage to the European economy, and we need to undo this. This requires a 180 degree turn on several policy issues for this to happen. The current Commission is unable to do that. The current European parliamentary majority of the European People's Party, the Socialists and the Liberals, are unwilling to do this because in the last cycle, they were the ones who enacted all of the regulations, which are now stifling European economy. We need a radical change in approach. We need a leadership which will put European interests first and is willing to draft policy and propose policy based on common sense.
Thanks, Andras. Ali, to you, we know business likes stability. Is that what we can get now as a result of this trade deal?
I think that business is probably firstly most concerned about making sure that we don't get a sort of a re-escalation, because obviously if there's still negotiations yet to come, and I think that Brussels is very cognizant of the kind of views of the last few days that basically it's capitulated to Washington and to Donald Trump. So it might be trying to sort of throw its muscle around in a few areas of sort of negotiations. We know that, for example, on some of the most sensitive areas for agriculture, a lot of the detail is still yet to be worked out. But I think by and large, you know, you're seeing from business a sort of sigh of relief for the time being that we're not going to have a huge trade war immediately between the US and the EU, but with an eye on what's coming next.
Thanks, Ali. Amy, to you, the US Treasury will now have rivers of money coming in from Europe, won't it, in all these tariffs, tens of billions of dollars. Where will that be spent? What do you think President Trump will do with that money?
You know, I think he's going to get it, invest it back in America. So it's going to go to companies that want to come here to America, invest in America, create jobs in America. And he has a very short timeline to get that done. So there's kind of there's fierce competition now going on in America on who's got projects in the works, who can stand up projects, who can get manufacturing and businesses to come to their states. So there's competition within the states on who's going to draw those businesses, and that's exactly what Donald Trump is hoping for. He is looking for investment and companies to come here, work here, invest here, and create jobs here.
Andras, to you, I just want to talk about the Hungarian perspective. We know there's a very good relationship between Viktor Orban and President Trump, mutual respect. Earlier this year, I interviewed your Foreign Secretary, Péter Szijjártó, and he said to me, he used the phrase, "We were Trump before there was Trump." So it seems Donald Trump has learned a lot from Hungarian politics and how Viktor Orban does business.
If you just look at the migration policy and how successful the Trump administration is and was in curbing illegal immigration through the border, that's definitely something we have done before even the first Trump administration. We built a border fence in 2015-16. We've stopped illegal immigration into Hungary and through Hungary into the EU. Unfortunately, what we see is that all of these policies, which we have been doing and the US is also doing, are working and have been and will work furthermore, and the US will reap the benefits in the future as well. What we don't see, however, is the kind of same lessons from the European Union. In the EU, Hungary is still being fined 1 million euros per day because we stop illegal immigration into the EU. And since we're talking about a trade deal today between the US and the EU, we should also be looking at what we can learn from the Trump administration in Europe, because the Trump administration has very effectively used actually trade measures and tariffs to pressure countries to take back their own nationals who previously they didn't want to take back. The EU is also a huge market. We could be using this trade leverage with third countries in order for them to take back their nationals and ease the pressure on European governments' budgets and on the EU in terms of illegal immigration. So I think the close cooperation is not only, and the good relationship is not only because of a personal level, it's because it's a very similar mindset of putting your own people first. And obviously it has worked in Hungary. It is working in America. We need to get rid of the globalist ideology in Brussels. And then the EU can also get back on the right path.
Thanks, Andras. Ali, to you, we know President Trump occasionally changes his mind and changes it back again. How long until he wants to renegotiate a trade deal with the European Union, or is this it definitively?
I think that there's scope for further conflict when we start looking at some of the details. Agriculture is always really sensitive. We know that one of the reasons that Donald Trump, for example, threw out the 50% threat a couple of weeks ago about tariffs on the EU was that he didn't think they were moving fast enough. So, it depends on how happy he is with these headline commitments versus what more there is left to negotiate. Interestingly, we've also seen requirements on other countries to trade and basically do less investment with China. I don't know where that leaves Hungary, obviously, but there are some clear kind of views about what Washington is doing to pressure other countries with respect to their third country ties. And I think that there is every possibility that, particularly if the EU feels that it needs to be seen to retaliate in some even moderate way, that perhaps Trump will sort of go back to the drawing board on what the sort of baseline tariff level is. And keep in mind that we have more across the board tariffs to come. It's not just these reciprocal tariffs, which are also being challenged in court here in the US. It's also these what we call national security 232 section tariffs, which are basically blanket sectoral ones. So there's still a lot of question marks about whether it's on pharmaceuticals or on steel, what the final landing block is going to be with these other countries. And I think that they're caught between a rock and a hard place about how much they react between now and when they get to a sort of actual final outcome.
Amy, to you, President Trump has had a very good few days, hasn't he? Getting this trade deal over the line, being in Scotland. A lot of the UK newspapers felt that Keir Starmer was made to look like a visitor in his own country because Trump held court with such swagger.
Well, right. He's had a good couple of days. He's had a rough several weeks here in the United States with some of his base being very riled up around the Jeffrey Epstein issues and what people have felt that he's not pursued as he promised there. So he needs some wins. I think he got a big win. We'll see what happens next with Canada and Mexico. But his international policy so far, which I even in the first administration, love him or hate him, Donald Trump had strength in his international policy and his global policies, and he continues to have that. So we'll see how this translates domestically. That's he's going to need a win before those midterms. We're just a year and a half away from those, less than that, and so that's got to weigh in his mind if he can keep this Congress, which has allowed him so much latitude and power to go across and make these kind of deals.
Andras, given the relationship between your country, Hungary, and President Trump, how do people in Hungary feel knowing that Ursula von der Leyen is negotiating on your behalf when I'm guessing many Hungarians feel that if Viktor Orban was driving this, Hungary would get a better deal?
Indeed. At the same time, we understand in Hungary that we need to be in the EU because it is the best forum to defend our interests, our national interests. When it comes to the European economy, our European partners are our most important trading partners. At the same time, we have mutual interest for the whole of the European economy to be successful, because that means that Hungary can be successful too. This also means that we need a European Commission. We need negotiators who are willing to take all the interests of all the member states into account when negotiating trade deals. We understand that this is more favorable to negotiate together, jointly as European Union, because then we're talking about a bigger market. The problem here is not the European Union. The problem here is the bad European leadership, which we desperately need to change. There's a very significant change in direction in the United States. We're still waiting for this to happen at European level. And that will be necessary, actually, to make European and American relations stable and prosperous on the long term. Because currently, the EU and most European governments are still led by left-leaning progressive leaders who do not like the Trump administration, who do not want to cooperate too much with the Trump administration. We need genuine, frank talk with our US counterparts of what our interests are, what their interests are, and then we can negotiate about mutual interests. This commission cannot do so because it is driven ideologically, and it has a very bad opinion of the Trump administration and doesn't want to do too much business with it anyhow.
Thanks, Andras. Final point to you, Ali. This deal is not good news if you're a car manufacturer. 25% levy still in place on European vehicles into the United States. or if you're a steel manufacturer, the tariffs there will be a 50% levy. So those two industries in particular will not be liking this deal.
No, I think we see basically what was previously an imbalance, to be fair to Trump relationship, if you strictly look at the tariffs. So I think the average tariff going into the US before Trump came back into office was about 2.5%. And, Europe was 10%. They've effectively flipped the script. He's effectively flipped the script. I think on steel, there will be some, I think, sort of detail to be worked out on kind of automotive standards and what actually gets to qualify for entering the market to attract that beneficial sort of tariff rate and vice versa. I think on steel, there's still quite some sort of yards to negotiate because there's going to be a quota system effectively. We're bringing back the Biden approach to doing quotas for specific steel. I think the US understands that a lot of what Europe is making is not, steel that's being dumped en masse. But the question is, and this is as much relevant for the UK as it is for Europe right now, is how long are we going to have to sit at these elevated sort of tariff levels, even though the UK is at 25% and the EU is at 50%, before we actually get the detail of some of those quotas. So again, we're still in the waiting game, despite having a deal with some headline commitments.
Allie Renison in Washington, D.C., thank you. Amy Koch in Minnesota and Andras Laszlo, MEP in Budapest. Thank you all so much for your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.